The night had wrapped itself in silence, the kind of silence only small-town Pennsylvania could know. Scranton's outskirts were barely lit, a few scattered porch lights and the distant hum of a freight train cutting across the valley. Daniel Reyes walked alone, his boots crunching softly on the gravel road winding through pine and maple trees. He had taken this path for months, always the same direction, always the same time, 11:13 p.m. The air carried a crisp bite, early November cold settling in, sharpening the night. Daniel tugged his flannel tighter, his breath misting out in front of him. Each step echoed slightly, as if the trees themselves were listening. Then he heard it, a second set of footsteps, faint, deliberate, behind him. He stopped. Silence. The trees swayed gently. An owl called once from deep within the woods. He turned slowly. Nothing. Just the long road behind, flanked by darkened trees and a stretch of field that vanished into black. He exhaled, shaking his head. Jesus, Dan, you're hearing things again. But when he started walking, the footsteps returned. Always behind, always just out of sync with his own. He quickened his pace. So did they. He stopped again. Silence. A crow's caw pierced the air this time, unsettlingly close. Daniel ran his hands through his thick black hair, face tightened in confusion. Was it exhaustion? PTSD? He had pushed himself lately, too many sleepless nights, too many ghosts. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from the familiar edge of panic. He'd been here before. Not on this road, not exactly, but in this mental space, between reality and something he couldn't name. He took a breath, then another. Steadier now. If stories that touch the soul speak to you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives. Daniel wasn't religious, not since the accident. Not since that afternoon 2 years ago when his world collapsed in the back of an ambulance. Faith, to him, had been the first casualty. Still, the footsteps kept returning. He made it to the bend in the road where the trees parted to reveal a small bridge crossing a dry creek bed. The moon cast long shadows over the planks, and Daniel paused, resting his hand on the cool metal rail. A memory clawed its way in, his daughter Emma running across this very bridge, arms outstretched, pretending to fly. That was before the divorce, before the screams, before everything died inside him. Daniel blinked the image away. Not now. He took a step onto the bridge, and again, there they were. Footsteps, behind him. This time he didn't stop. He turned. And for a breathless moment he swore someone was there. A shape. A woman, maybe? Pale, moving, gone. He blinked hard, chest tightening. Nope, he muttered. Not tonight. He walked faster, eyes scanning the woods, heart pounding louder than the wind. By the time he reached the far end of the bridge, he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. It wasn't paranoia. He knew that feeling well. This was different, calmer, like a presence, not a threat. But it unnerved him all the same. He spun again, still nothing, just him, the road, and the silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, as he turned forward again, his foot caught on something. He stumbled, caught himself, looked down. A white flower, out of place. Fresh. Lying in the middle of the road, Daniel crouched. It was a lily, still wet with dew. His hands trembled as he picked it up. The air around him shifted, warmer, oddly sweet, as if the night itself were exhaling. He stood slowly, scanning the road once more. This time he didn't hear footsteps, but deep inside something had begun to stir, a knowing, a memory, or maybe a calling. Whatever it was, it wouldn't let him go. Scranton wore its history like a heavy coat. Old factories sat in silence, their brick walls cracked with time, watching the years pass with soot-stained windows. The air carried the scent of old steel and leaf smoke, especially in November. It was a town stitched together by memories and scars. Daniel Reyes lived in a 2-bedroom duplex just off Musick Street. The house was quiet, cluttered but clean, filled with remnants of a life that felt borrowed. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Emma, her smile frozen in time. He hadn't moved it in over a year. The morning after the footsteps, Daniel stared at that photo, his coffee untouched, cold. Sleep had barely visited him. His mind played loops, Lily on the road, footsteps in the dark, the shape of a woman that vanished in the blink of an eye. He knew better than to tell anyone. Last time he opened up, it cost him his job. The ambulance company hadn't said it outright, but everyone knew. A medic with panic attacks and ghosts wasn't good for business. Still, something about that night clawed at him. Later that day, he drove into the city. The streets were a blend of fading autumn color and early Christmas decorations. Every block held a church, Catholic, Protestant, Ukrainian Orthodox. Bells chimed faintly as he parked near St. Cecilia's, the church he hadn't entered in over a decade. But he didn't go inside. Instead, he walked across the street to the rectory, hesitating before knocking. Father McCleary opened the door, tall and lean, face weathered with age and wisdom. His voice was warm. "Daniel Reyes, that's a name I haven't heard in years." "Didn't expect you to," Daniel said, hands in his coat pockets. "You got a minute?" The priest stepped aside. "Always." They sat in his office, wood-paneled walls lined with books and faded religious art. The air smelled like old paper and incense. "I've been seeing things," Daniel began. "Or hearing, maybe, I don't know." "Footsteps?" McCleary asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel blinked. "How did you—" "Just a guess," the priest replied gently. "Start from the beginning." Daniel told him everything. The walk, the bridge, the flower. McCleary listened in silence, fingers steepled. When Daniel finished, the priest leaned back. "Sometimes we're given signs when we least want them," he said. "Doesn't mean you're losing your mind. But it doesn't mean you're seeing miracles either." Daniel frowned. "So which is it?" "Maybe both." Outside, the afternoon sun faded into a steel gray. A cold wind scraped down the street, whistling through gaps in windows and bricks. "I don't believe anymore," Daniel said finally. "Not in any of it, not since—" "You don't have to," McCleary said. "But sometimes belief isn't about you. It's about what shows up when everything else falls away." Daniel left more confused than when he arrived. That evening he visited Maya. She was 16 now, taller, still wore the same purple nail polish Emma once loved. Maya had been Emma's best friend since preschool. They didn't talk often, but sometimes Daniel checked in. She greeted him at the porch with a tentative smile. "Hey, Mr. Reyes." "Hey, kiddo, got a minute?" They sat on the steps, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cider Maya's mother brought out. He didn't talk about the footsteps. Instead, he asked about school, about her art, about anything but himself. Before he left, Maya handed him a folded piece of paper. "I drew something weird," she said. "Had a dream about Emma. She said you'd need this." Daniel nodded, forcing a smile, and pocketed it without looking. Back home, hours later, he opened it. A pencil sketch. A woman in a veil, pale eyes, walking beside a shadowed man. Beneath it, Maya had written, "She walks with you even when you don't believe." Daniel sat in the dark, staring at the paper, the ache in his chest growing deeper, heavier. Something was coming. He could feel it. Daniel couldn't sleep. The paper Maya had given him rested on the kitchen table, its edges curling slightly under the soft breeze from the cracked window. The woman in the sketch, veil, pale eyes, a quiet gravity, felt more real than dream. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to reach him, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to be found. At 11:13 p.m., he stepped outside again. Same road, same silence. The moon hung low, casting a silver sheen across the fields. His boots made the only sound, but every few steps he paused, waiting. Nothing. He reached the bridge and slowed. The memory of the lily still haunted him. It hadn't withered. He'd placed it on his windowsill, and 2 days later it was still alive. That wasn't natural. Tonight, there was no flower. But there was a scent, something faint like lavender or fresh linen dancing on the air. Then it happened. He felt her before he saw her, a shift in the space beside him. A presence, not behind, beside. His breath caught. He turned, and there she was. A woman, walking silently next to him. She wore a flowing pale blue veil that covered her head and shoulders. Her gown shimmered faintly under the moonlight, simple yet almost translucent. Her feet were bare, yet there was no sound, no crunch of gravel, no trace of breath in the cold. Daniel froze mid-step. She didn't look at him, just walked. Her face was calm, timeless, eyes the color of river stone. Her skin radiated warmth, though the night air stung his cheeks. "Who are you?" His voice came out more as a whisper than a question. She said nothing. They walked a few more paces together. His pulse thundered in his ears. "I don't understand," he said. "Why are you here?" Still, no answer. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. She stopped, her gaze meeting his. There was no judgment in her eyes, only depth, and something that felt like grief and peace held in the same breath. She raised a hand, not to touch him, but just to acknowledge his presence. A silent gesture, then she spoke. One sentence. Her voice was soft, layered in echoes, yet crystal clear. "You are not alone." Daniel stood motionless, and then she vanished. Not suddenly, not in a blink. It was as if her shape dissolved back into the air, the way mist does when the sun rises. He was alone again, but the air still carried the scent. The warmth lingered. He stood on the bridge for a long time, trying to piece together what had just happened. He wasn't sure how long he stood there before his legs moved again, walking slowly back toward town. Was he losing his mind? He reached his house, locking the door behind him like it would keep something spiritual out. He paced, rubbed his face, poured a drink, then set it back down. "You are not alone." The words echoed. He sat at the kitchen table, eyes drawn again to Maya's sketch. It was her. The same veil, the same look, but why him? He pulled out a notebook and began to write everything he could remember, her expression, her pace, the exact words. He wrote until his hand cramped. Outside, the wind picked up. He felt something shift inside his chest. A quiet breaking. Not fear, though there was that too, but something deeper. It was the first time in years that Daniel Reyes cried. Not from guilt, not from rage, but from the unbearable weight of being seen. Daniel didn't tell anyone at first. Not about the woman, not about her voice, and certainly not about the way her presence lingered inside him like a song he couldn't stop hearing. But 3 days later, after pacing through another sleepless morning, he found himself standing outside Claire's house. She still lived on the south side of Scranton, in the same modest bungalow they'd bought when Emma was born. The porch light was always on. She kept wind chimes by the door, and they played softly in the cold November breeze. Claire opened the door with a look of surprise, then hesitation. Her auburn hair was pulled into a tight bun. She wore no makeup, just that familiar guarded stare. "Daniel," she said, holding the door but not stepping aside, "what are you doing here?" "I need 5 minutes," he said, voice rough. "Please." She hesitated, then nodded. 5. Inside, everything looked the same. Beige couch, bookshelf crammed with old novels, Emma's piano untouched in the corner. A framed photo of their daughter at age 10 smiled from the mantel. "I know this is strange," Daniel began, "but I've seen something or someone." Claire crossed her arms. "Is this about your dreams again?" "No, it wasn't a dream." He told her, slowly, carefully, about the woman in blue, about the voice, about the lily. He tried to leave out the emotion, but it bled through anyway. His hands trembled as he spoke. Claire didn't interrupt. When he finished, she sat back and exhaled hard. "You need help," she said quietly. "I'm not making this up. I didn't say you were, but you've done this before. You spiral, and then you drag everyone down with you." Daniel's jaw clenched. "This is different." "It's always different," she snapped. "Daniel, I've spent years rebuilding myself after what happened. I'm not going back into the storm with you." He looked at her, trying to read past the anger, but there was fear in her eyes too, and sadness. Old wounds reopened. "You think I'm crazy," he said. "I think you're hurting," she replied, But if you keep chasing ghosts, you're going to drown in them. He stood up, chest tight. You don't believe me. Fine. I didn't expect you to. Claire's voice softened almost reluctantly. I believe you believe it. That's enough to worry me. He turned to go. Daniel, she said before he reached the door. You're not the only one who lost her, but I can't lose you too. Not again. He paused but didn't respond. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. Later that night, he opened a box of Emma's things. He didn't know what he was looking for, maybe confirmation that he hadn't broken completely. He found one of her journals. Inside, between doodles and song lyrics, was a folded letter addressed to Maya. The envelope wasn't sealed. He debated for a long moment, then opened it. Dear Maya, if anything ever happens to me, I want you to look after my dad. He's the best person I know, even when he's sad. Tell him not to be afraid of angels. Some of them are quiet, but they never leave you. Daniel's breath caught. It was her handwriting, the looped letters, the childish sincerity. He clutched the note like it might disappear, eyes wet and burning. His phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Did you read it? Daniel replied, hands shaking. Yeah. Another message. I think she meant now. Outside, the wind shifted. He didn't know what was waiting, but he knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. Daniel stood outside St. Cecilia's church, staring up at the Gothic stone facade like it was a mountain he hadn't climbed in years. His hands were stuffed deep into the pockets of his coat, shoulders hunched against the cold. The sky above was heavy with low-hanging clouds, casting everything in a dull pewter light. He hadn't stepped inside this church since Emma's funeral. Every brick of it held something he didn't want to face. Echoes of hymns sung through grief, whispers of a God he no longer trusted. But now something had shifted. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The scent of incense and old wood filled his lungs. Candles flickered near the altar, and faint light streamed through stained glass, painting fractured colors on the tile floor. He stepped inside and sat in the very last pew, as far from the altar as possible. His fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the bench in front of him. He didn't pray. He just breathed. A few moments later, Father McCleary entered quietly and took a seat beside him. I was hoping I'd see you, the priest said softly. Daniel kept his eyes forward. I'm not here for confession. You don't have to be. Sometimes sitting with it is enough. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel spoke. I still see her. The woman. She doesn't say anything else. She just walks beside me. McCleary nodded slowly. You're not the first to see her. Daniel turned sharply. What does that mean? The priest hesitated, choosing his words. There are stories, visions, people broken by grief who've seen her too. Always the same, veil, silence, a presence that doesn't leave. You think I'm delusional? No, McCleary said. I think something's calling you. And you're trying to resist it. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. I don't need signs or miracles. I needed her to live. That's all I ever asked. McCleary turned to face him. And what about now? What are you asking for? Daniel's throat tightened. Peace, I guess. Or a reason. The priest nodded again. Those usually come in pieces, not answers. A long silence stretched between them. Then Daniel spoke again, voice lower. Do you remember the highway crash, the one with the school bus? McCleary looked at him, eyes narrowing. Yes. I was first on scene, Daniel said. Emma was with me. Ride along for the day. It was her birthday. The priest said nothing, just listened. There were kids everywhere, screaming, bleeding. Emma ran to help a girl trapped under the railing. I told her to stay back. His voice broke. She didn't listen. Daniel stared ahead, seeing it all again. The guardrail gave way. Hit her in the chest. I held her the whole ride. I knew, deep down, I knew she wasn't going to make it, but I kept trying. Tears welled in his eyes, burning hot. I begged God over and over, not her, take me. Over and over. His hands clenched. But no one was listening. McCleary placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He listened. He just didn't intervene. Then what's the point of faith? The priest's voice was steady. Maybe not to change the outcome, maybe just to carry you through it. Daniel stood abruptly, brushing the tears from his face. That's not enough. He started toward the exit. Daniel, McCleary called softly. Some angels walk softly. Some saints walk beside us. Daniel stopped at the door, hand resting on the handle. She walks with you, the priest said. But maybe you're the one being asked to walk too. Outside, the clouds finally broke, and soft flakes of snow began to fall. Daniel stepped into the cold, unsure if anything had changed, only that something inside him was no longer silent. Lackawanna Avenue buzzed with the lazy rhythm of late afternoon. The sky was a dull slate, heavy with the promise of more snow. Daniel walked with no real purpose, just a need to move, to breathe, to not be in his own head for a while. His hands were shoved deep into his coat pockets, shoulders hunched as cars passed in sputtering intervals. Across the street near an old diner, he saw a man stumble. It happened fast, too fast to think. 1 second the guy was walking. The next he crumpled forward, his body jerking unnaturally. People froze. A woman screamed. A cup of coffee hit the ground and shattered. Daniel was already running. He dropped beside the man, mid-40s, wiry build, skin pale and tight. His limbs shook violently. A seizure. Call 911, Daniel barked, sliding his coat under the man's head. People backed away. He checked the man's pulse. Strong, fast. His breathing was shallow, strained. Just ride it out, Daniel whispered, eyes scanning the man's twitching body. You're okay, you'll come back. He shielded the man's head from the curb, hand steady despite the chaos in his chest. Then something shifted. A warmth on his right side. Daniel didn't have to look. He felt her. The same presence, the same calm. The woman in blue was there, standing silently beside him. His heart should have raced, but it didn't. Somehow it slowed. His focus sharpened. The man's convulsions began to ease. His limbs relaxed, his breathing steadied. Paramedics arrived minutes later. Daniel backed off, giving them room, his hands trembling now that it was over. One of them looked up and blinked. Reyes? Yeah, Daniel said. Still have the patch, don't ask. The medic nodded with quiet respect. Daniel turned to where the woman had been. Gone. But something lingered. He walked into the diner, sat at the counter, and ordered a black coffee he didn't really want. The waitress poured without asking questions. A man down the counter stared at him, middle-aged, thick beard, flannel shirt. You were calm, the man said. Old habit, Daniel replied. You pray, the man asked. Daniel looked over, surprised. Not really. The man nodded slowly. Don't need to. Someone was praying for you. Daniel blinked. What? He didn't answer, just paid and left. Daniel sat there for a long time, coffee cooling untouched. The memory of the warmth beside him, real, undeniable, sank deeper into his chest. Later that night, he stood outside the community center. A sign read, Grief Support Group, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. He hadn't planned on stopping. His truck was running. He was only going to pass by. But something in him said, go in. Inside, a circle of chairs. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. People sipped tea, avoiding eye contact. He scanned the room, unsure. A woman approached, grey hair in a loose bun, soft voice, deep smile. First time? She asked. Daniel nodded. I'm Mrs. Dobbins, she said. You don't have to talk, you just have to be. He stayed, listened. Widows, brothers, parents, friends. Each story chipped away at the wall around his chest. He didn't speak that night, but he didn't leave early either. At the end, Mrs. Dobbins handed him a small white card. Printed on it were 6 words. Some burdens aren't meant to carry alone. As he walked out into the cold, he looked up. A flake of snow touched his cheek, then another, then 100 more. The streets were quiet, but he didn't feel alone. Daniel sat in his truck outside the therapist's office, engine idling. The building was small, tucked between a laundromat and a bakery on Mulberry Street. A plastic sign read, Dr. Leah Harrow, LCSW, Trauma and Grief Counseling. The appointment had been scheduled 2 weeks ago. He almost cancelled 3 times. He checked the clock. 4 minutes past the hour. Inside the cab, his palms were sweating. He could still walk away. Instead, he shut off the engine, stepped out and walked in. The waiting room smelled like lavender. Soft jazz played from a speaker somewhere overhead. He barely heard it over the pounding in his chest. Dr. Harrow's door opened gently. She was in her mid-50s, glasses low on her nose, with the presence of someone who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. "Mr. Reyes," he nodded. "Come in. Sit wherever you'd like." Her office was warm, a soft lamp casting a yellow glow. A bookshelf lined the wall filled with titles about trauma, healing, and the mind. He sat stiffly on the couch, arms crossed. Dr. Harrow didn't take notes. She just looked at him, calm, unblinking. "You said on the phone this was about unresolved loss." He nodded. "My daughter, 2 years ago." "I'm sorry." He said nothing. "Tell me why you're here today." Daniel shifted. "Something's happening. I've been seeing, I don't know, a woman. She doesn't speak, but she shows up, especially when things get bad." Dr. Harrow didn't flinch. "And who do you think she is?" Daniel shook his head. "An angel or a ghost or my mind breaking apart. Take your pick." She let silence sit between them. "I'm not crazy," he added quickly. "I don't think you are," she replied. "But I do think something in you is finally speaking, and it's using whatever language you'll listen to." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. She leaned forward slightly. "Grief isn't a straight line. Sometimes it needs symbols. Sometimes it needs quiet." He looked at his hands. "She died in front of me. I was the one who couldn't save her." Dr. Harrow waited. Daniel's voice broke. "I do CPR for a living. I teach people how to handle trauma. I've pulled kids out of wrecks, burning buildings, overdoses. But when it was my own daughter, I failed." Tears welled, but he didn't stop. "She died scared, bleeding, on her birthday. And I was right there, telling her to hold on. And she listened, because she trusted me." His jaw clenched. "She trusted me." Dr. Harrow handed him a tissue but didn't interrupt. "I keep asking what I missed, what I did wrong. And every time I hear those footsteps, I think maybe it's her or God or someone trying to punish me." "What if it's not punishment?" she asked. "What if it's presence?" Daniel looked up slowly. "What if this figure isn't here to accuse you," she continued, "but to walk with you through the guilt, through the grief, until you can finally lay it down?" His chest heaved, eyes red. "I don't know how." "You just started," she said. He left the office 30 minutes later, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He didn't feel better, but he felt cracked open. That night he walked again. Same road, same silence. But when he heard the footsteps, he didn't panic, he didn't turn. He whispered, "I hear you," and kept walking. The wind rustled the trees. No fear. Just the steady sound of his boots, and hers. The dream came without warning. No thunder, no fire, just soft light and silence. Daniel stood in a field of golden grass beneath an endless sky. The woman in blue was there, further away this time. She didn't speak. She only pointed to the east. When he woke, the word lingered in his mind. Bethlehem. He sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't the biblical Bethlehem he thought of. It was the one in Pennsylvania, less than 2 hours away. He hadn't been there in years. But something inside him whispered, "Go." That morning, he packed light. Thermos of coffee, the sketch Maya had given him, and Emma's letter to Maya. He didn't tell anyone, didn't want to explain what he couldn't explain himself. The road was lined with bare trees, their branches like bones against the overcast sky. The further he drove, the quieter everything felt, as if the noise of the world faded the closer he got. Bethlehem was preparing for Christmas. Lights wrapped lampposts, wreaths hung on doors, and carols played faintly from store speakers. The smell of roasted nuts and pine drifted through the air. He didn't know where to start, so he walked, past historic Moravian buildings, past the old steel stacks, massive ghosts of another era, until he reached a park near Monocacy Creek. A woman sat on a bench near the water, bundled in a thick coat and scarf. Her eyes met his as he passed, and something about her made him pause. "You're looking for something," she said. Daniel turned slowly. "Excuse me?" She smiled gently. Her accent was soft, Central American. "You walk like someone with questions." Daniel hesitated, then walked over. "I guess I am." She patted the bench beside her. "I'm Marisol." "Daniel." He sat. They stared at the slow-moving creek in silence for a moment. Then she spoke. "You've seen her." Daniel looked at her, startled. "She walks in blue, doesn't speak much." "Just enough." He said nothing. Marisol nodded. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." He cleared his throat. "Who is she?" Marisol's face grew thoughtful. "Some say she's Mary. Others say she's the soul of someone who died and chose to stay and walk with those who suffer. I don't know, but I know this. She walks where pain has lived." Daniel looked down at his hands. Marisol continued. "She came to me when my son was sick. The doctors had no answers. I was losing my faith, my mind. Then one night she stood beside his hospital bed. She didn't touch him, just stayed there." Daniel swallowed hard. "What happened?" "He lived," Marisol said simply, "and I didn't break." Daniel sat back, wind brushing against his face. "She doesn't always heal," Marisol added. "Sometimes she just carries what we can't." He nodded slowly. "Why me?" Marisol gave a soft smile. "Maybe because you carry more than you should." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn medallion, a depiction of the Virgin Mary, silver and smooth from years of being held. "Take it," she said. "I can't. It's not for protection. It's a reminder that even when the road is silent, you're not walking it alone." Daniel took the medal, the metal cool against his palm. As they sat in silence, snow began to fall, soft, slow, unhurried. He didn't find what he thought he'd come for, but maybe he found what he needed. The snow had stopped by the time Daniel left Bethlehem. The clouds broke apart as he drove, letting streaks of pale sunlight spill over the highway. He turned the silver medallion over in his hand again and again, its edges now warm from his grip. It wasn't about superstition. It was about connection, an anchor to a truth he didn't fully understand yet. Near Allentown, traffic slowed, red lights ahead, flashing hazard signs. A sea of brake lights glowing like an alert against the gray afternoon. Then he saw it, metal twisted across 2 lanes, the wreckage of a 3-car pileup. Daniel pulled to the shoulder, instincts kicking in. He jumped from his truck and sprinted toward the scene. Bystanders stood back, frozen, calling 911 or simply staring. One of the vehicles, a black SUV, was smoking at the hood. Its front was crumpled into the guardrail. Inside, a child was strapped in the back seat, motionless. Daniel didn't think, he ran. The driver's door was jammed. He pounded on the window. The woman inside was conscious but dazed, her forehead bleeding. "I'm getting your kid out," he shouted. She nodded weakly. Smoke was thick. Heat pressed through the metal. He yanked the back door. It opened. The boy was maybe 6. Eyes wide, tears streaked across his face. "Hey, I got you," Daniel said, voice calm. He unbuckled the child and cradled him close, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. As he turned to run, a loud pop cracked through the air, something under the hood igniting. Daniel covered the boy's head with his jacket and sprinted away just as a burst of flame climbed through the engine. He collapsed on the grass, holding the boy close, lungs burning. The boy sobbed, arms wrapped around his neck. "It's okay," Daniel whispered. "You're safe." An EMT rushed over and took the child gently from his arms. Daniel stayed on the ground, coughing hard. The adrenaline still surged through him like electricity. Then it happened again. The warmth. He looked up. She stood by the smoking car a few feet away, veil fluttering in the windless air. Her hands were at her sides, eyes steady on the wreck, and for the first time she moved with purpose. She walked to the boy, now sitting on the gurney, placed a hand above his head, never touching, just hovering. Then she turned. Their eyes met. She didn't speak, but Daniel didn't need words. He felt it. He had done the right thing. He stood slowly, chest heaving, and walked toward her. But she was gone. The boy's mother approached him, shaken but grateful. "You saved him," she said, voice trembling. Thank you. God, thank you." Daniel couldn't speak. He nodded, trying to hold himself steady. One of the firefighters clapped him on the back. "Are you okay, man?" "I think so." "You a paramedic?" "Was." The firefighter grinned. "Well, whatever you are, you were right where you needed to be." Daniel watched the ambulances drive off, sirens fading into the distance. He stood there long after the wreck was cleared, the highway buzzing back to life around him. There were no angels in fire and noise, no miracles on display. But something deeper had happened, a moment of choice, of courage, and she had been there, not to stop it but to witness it. When he got back in the truck, he didn't feel heroic. He felt human again. He drove in silence, snow melting from the windshield, the medallion still warm in his pocket. Daniel didn't expect Maya to call. It had been weeks since he'd heard from her, and he hadn't dared reach out. He had been consumed with the incidents on the highway, the woman in blue and the strange medallion in his pocket. But her voice on the phone was steady, even soft, as if she had rehearsed every word. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "I need to tell you something." Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Go ahead." "I've seen her," Maya admitted. "The woman in blue. I thought I was dreaming at first, but it's real. I saw her the night my mother she almost died. She didn't touch anyone. She just watched. And then everything calmed." Daniel swallowed. "You're not making this up?" "No," she said, her voice small. "I didn't believe it at first. I don't know. But I saw her. And then I saw you. In my dream. You were surrounded by light, and she was walking beside you." Daniel exhaled sharply. His chest felt heavy, weighted by years of guilt and sorrow. You saw me." His voice cracked. "What does that mean?" Maya hesitated. "I don't know exactly, but I know she chose to be near you, watching, helping." "Maybe you're supposed to be helping too." Daniel closed his eyes, gripping the steering wheel. He hadn't thought about helping anyone lately, not since Emma died. He'd been too consumed with failure, too trapped in the echo of what he couldn't change. "Do you think I can do that?" he asked quietly. "After everything, after me?" "Yes," she said simply. "You've been broken, but you've survived. That counts for more than you know. You have a gift, Mr. Reyes. You don't even realize it yet." He rubbed his face, feeling the weariness of months settle deeper into his bones. He remembered the pile-up, the black SUV, the child in his arms, and then he remembered the warmth, the quiet presence beside him, not telling him what to do, just witnessing. Silent encouragement. Guidance he hadn't understood at the time. "Maybe I do," he said finally. "Maybe I've been carrying more than I thought I could. Maybe it's not just about me anymore." Maya's voice softened. "Exactly. You've been holding the pain, but now you have a choice. To share it, to walk beside others." Daniel smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "I guess it's time." "Yes," Maya whispered. "And I'll be here, watching, learning, helping too." They ended the call, and Daniel leaned back in the driver's seat, eyes staring at the faint snow beginning to fall. Bethlehem faded behind him in the distance, but its lesson lingered. The woman in blue, the medallion, the dreams, everything was converging into something he could finally grasp. Not control, not fix, but accept. That evening he returned home. The city streets of Scranton were quiet, but he didn't feel the heaviness of isolation anymore. The snow melted beneath streetlights, reflecting the faint warmth of street lamps. Daniel unlocked his door and stepped inside, feeling the weight in his chest ease. He pulled out Emma's letter, rereading the words she had written for Maya. "Tell him not to be afraid of angels. Some of them are quiet, but they never leave you." He traced the lines of her handwriting with a finger, feeling the connection between past and present, grief and hope. Daniel realized he could finally forgive himself, if only in small steps. Later, he found a small notebook, blank pages waiting. He wrote down everything he remembered: the footsteps, the warmth, the woman in blue, the medallion, the highway rescue. Each word a small release, a way to carry the burden without breaking. By the time he closed the notebook, he understood something important. The presence beside him wasn't always about protection. Sometimes it was about teaching him to trust himself, to walk with others, to survive without fear. He looked out the window. The snow had stopped. Streetlights flickered, illuminating the quiet city. Daniel felt something shift inside him, a sense of purpose, faint but undeniable, rooted deep in the cracks of his heart. For the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted. He felt ready. Daniel woke the next morning with a quiet determination he hadn't felt in years. The heaviness that had gripped his chest for so long had softened, replaced by a subtle warmth and clarity. He didn't know exactly what the day would bring, but he knew it would involve walking, helping, moving forward. The woman in blue hadn't appeared yet, but he could feel her presence in the stillness, in the air around him. He grabbed his coat, slung the medallion around his neck, and stepped into the streets of Scranton. The sun was low, cutting golden stripes across the pavements, illuminating the frost that clung to parked cars. He began with a simple walk, passing familiar blocks and neighborhoods. Each step felt purposeful. He imagined the footsteps beside him, soft, steady, reassuring. By mid-morning he came across Mr. Thomas, a retired veteran sitting on a bench near the corner of Mulberry and Vine, shaking slightly in the cold. "Hey, Mr. Thomas," Daniel said, approaching carefully. "You okay?" The older man nodded, but his hands trembled as he held a small coffee cup. "Just thinking." Daniel sat beside him. "Want to talk about it?" The veteran hesitated, then began to speak. Memories of service, losses of comrades, the loneliness of returning home. Daniel listened. Every so often he would reach over, placing a hand on the man's shoulder, grounding him without judgment, and all the while he felt the familiar warmth beside him, silent, steady, encouraging. They spoke for nearly an hour. When Mr. Thomas finally smiled, it was small but genuine. "Thanks, Daniel," he said. "You've done more than you know." Daniel nodded. "We all need someone to walk beside us." By afternoon, word had spread quietly. A young widow, Sophie, invited him to help her with errands she had been avoiding for months. He accompanied her, listening to stories of grief, loss, and resilience. He offered practical help, but mostly his presence, a companion for those silent moments that are heavier than words. As he moved through the city, he encountered more people quietly in need. A young man struggling with addiction, a father mourning a sudden loss, an elderly woman afraid of leaving her apartment. With each encounter, Daniel felt his own heart expand. The woman in blue appeared occasionally, a shadow at the edge of vision, never interfering but always walking beside, silently guiding him. By late afternoon, he found himself back on the road near the edge of town, the same stretch where he first saw the lily, the footsteps, the bridge that haunted him. He paused, taking in the quiet, the fading light, and the subtle hum of life around him. Daniel realized something. He had been given a gift not to change the world in grand gestures, but to walk with people in their darkness, to offer presence where absence had once prevailed. Each act, no matter how small, carried weight. Each shared story, each quiet moment of companionship, healed not only others but himself. He stopped walking for a moment, breathing in the cold, crisp air. The sun dipped lower, brushing the horizon in shades of amber and violet. The city seemed less daunting, less broken, and for the first time he didn't feel the pull of grief as a crushing weight, but as a tether to what mattered. The woman in blue stood at the periphery of his vision, not touching, not speaking, only watching. Daniel understood her role now, not as a guide to miracles, but as a witness to his growth, a companion for the quiet work of healing. He smiled faintly and resumed his walk, boots crunching on frost-laden gravel. Each step was deliberate, each breath conscious. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. The people he had walked with that day, the silent encouragement he felt beside him, the small changes in himself. It all mattered. He understood now that healing was a journey walked step by step, side by side. The shadows lengthened, but Daniel didn't hurry. The path ahead was long, but for the first time it didn't feel empty. He could feel the footsteps beside him, steady, unwavering, and he knew he wasn't alone. Daniel received the call just as dusk settled over Scranton. His phone vibrated insistently in his pocket, the tone sharp and urgent. He answered, recognizing Father McCleary's strained voice. "Daniel, it's St. Cecilia's. There's a fire. You need to get here now." The truck's engine roared as Daniel drove through streets slick with melting snow. Sirens pierced the cold air, distant but growing louder. Flames were already visible, licking the sky from the church's bell tower as he rounded the corner. Smoke thickened the atmosphere, turning everything into shades of grey and orange. People gathered across the street, shivering, their eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel pushed past them, ducking under caution tape, heart pounding. He didn't know what drove him forward, instinct, urgency, or the memory of everything the church had meant to him over the years. Inside, the heat was intense. The air burned his lungs, thick with smoke and the acrid scent of charred wood. Flames hungrily consumed the pews, climbing walls and reaching for the stained glass windows. The altar flickered in orange light, fragile and fleeting. Father McCleary appeared, coughing, waving Daniel over. "The sermons! They're in the cabinet! We have to save them!" he shouted over the roar of the fire. Daniel didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the back of the church, smoke stinging his eyes. His hands fumbled over the heavy wooden cabinet. He yanked the drawers open, pulling out stacks of yellowed paper, fragile and sacred, Emma's favorite hymns scribbled in margins. Flames crackled dangerously close. Every second mattered. Then he froze. A familiar presence hovered at the edge of the chaos. The woman in blue. She didn't speak, didn't guide, didn't touch. But somehow her calm radiated through the fire, and for a moment Daniel's panic eased. He understood. She was showing him courage, not protection. The choices were his to make. He grabbed the final bundle of sermons and ran toward the exit. Heat pressed against his back, but his focus was sharp. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. He didn't stumble, didn't falter. Outside, the night air hit him like a wave. He coughed, gasping, cradling the precious papers. Flames roared behind him, swallowing parts of the structure, but he felt relief, satisfaction, and a twinge of sorrow all at once. Father McCleary patted his shoulder, eyes watering. "You did it. They're safe." Daniel nodded, trying to calm the rapid beating of his heart. He looked back at the inferno and caught a glimpse of her again. The woman in blue stood near the edge of the light and smoke, her veil catching the wind, silent and serene. She nodded ever so slightly before vanishing. The crowd murmured, amazed at the survival of the sermons, Daniel's courage and the sheer audacity of stepping into danger. Firefighters rushed in, battling the blaze, but Daniel didn't need them now. The worst was over. As he walked away, charred embers falling around him like falling stars, he felt a shift inside. The fear that had once dominated him, the grief that had shackled him, seemed lighter. He understood that courage didn't erase fear. It walked alongside it, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes quietly witnessed. Daniel thought of Emma, thought of Maya, Father McCleary, the people he had helped, and the woman in blue who had always remained beside him, guiding without interference. For the first time, he didn't feel helpless. He felt capable. The city streets were dark now, quiet except for distant sirens and the occasional mutter of onlookers still shaken by the fire. Daniel walked slowly back to his truck, paper bundles safe, chest rising and falling steadily. He realized that moments like these were lessons in trust, presence, courage, and the strength to face what was impossible alone. When he reached his truck, he glanced back one last time. Flames still licked the roof, but the church's heart, the stories, memories, and guidance within the sermons remained intact. He exhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of survival and purpose seep into his bones. Winter had loosened its grip on Scranton, leaving patches of melting snow along the sidewalks and streets. The air was crisp but lighter, carrying faint scents of pine and damp earth. Daniel walked deliberately, boots crunching through the last frost, feeling the rhythm of his own steps in sync with something larger than himself. He no longer walked alone, not in the sense of ghostly presences beside him, but in the echo of lives he had touched. Each person he had helped, each hand he had steadied, each story he had listened to, they lingered inside him like light in a dim room. And for the first time in years, he felt capable of carrying more than grief. Claire had come back into his life, tentatively at first. She didn't ask him to be someone he wasn't, didn't demand explanations. Instead, she offered presence, a bridge to family and connection he hadn't allowed himself to hope for. They had shared long conversations over coffee, recounting Emma's favorite songs, laughing over small imperfect memories and crying over those that were impossibly heavy. There were no romantic gestures, not yet. Only the fragile but real reconstruction of a family. Daniel had become something he never anticipated, a mentor, a companion, a silent guide for others navigating darkness. He met with veterans at the park, walked with widows who needed to remember how to breathe, counseled teenagers lost in grief, and stayed quietly by the side of the frail and frightened elderly. He didn't need applause or recognition. His reward was the soft acknowledgement in someone's eyes when hope returned, however briefly. He carried Emma's letter in his coat pocket, sometimes reading it aloud when no one was near. Tell him not to be afraid of angels. Some of them are quiet, but they never leave you. It reminded him why he could no longer let fear dominate his life. Angels didn't always speak. Guidance often arrived in subtle ways, and he had learned to trust it. Claire and Daniel walked together one afternoon, past the old playground near the park where Emma had loved to swing. The ice on the swings glistened under the sun, and the chill of winter had given way to a tentative spring warmth. They spoke quietly, not of the past mistakes, but of the future they might navigate together, not as lovers yet, but as a family learning to exist in peace again. Later, Daniel returned to the edge of Scranton, the roads he had once walked alone. The bridge over the dry creek where the lily had first appeared now seemed less daunting. Each step forward echoed the steps he had once feared. He realized he had become the guide. Others would look to him for calm, for courage, for presence in moments when silence threatened to consume them. The woman in blue had not appeared in weeks. Daniel understood why. She had never been there to intervene, only to show him the possibility of walking faithfully through fear and grief. Her lesson had been clear. He was now capable of carrying the light himself. By evening, he stopped by a quiet street lamp, the fading sun casting long shadows across the pavement. He exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of redemption not as a burden, but as an earned understanding. Every choice, every act of presence, every step had led him to this edge of healing. Claire approached, bringing warmth and the quiet reassurance of shared experiences. Daniel glanced at her, nodded and kept walking, silently acknowledging that the road was long, but no longer terrifying. He carried hope, courage, and the understanding that loss didn't end the possibility of life or love. That night, Daniel wrote in his notebook. He documented small victories, lessons, and memories of the woman in blue. Not to chase her, but to honor the journey that had transformed him. He had stepped to the edge of despair, faced it, and found a way to emerge, not unscathed but alive and ready to guide. He finally understood what it meant to walk with purpose, carrying the light for those still searching, knowing he was not alone. Daniel found himself back on the gravel road where it had all begun, the stretch just outside Scranton, flanked by skeletal trees and frost-tipped grass. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the uneven surface, turning familiar ground into something both comforting and strange. He paused, boots crunching softly, listening to the whisper of wind through the bare branches. For years, this road had been a place of fear and reflection, a corridor of ghosts both literal and figurative. Tonight it felt different. He had walked alongside grief, beside fear, through moments of doubt and courage alike. Now, there was only presence, his own, steady, unbroken, unafraid. The footsteps returned, soft, measured, familiar. Daniel stopped, letting the sound align with his own. He didn't turn. He didn't panic. Instead, he focused on the rhythm, allowing it to fill the space beside him. The footsteps didn't close in. They didn't need to. He felt the guidance, subtle but profound, shaping the way he moved forward. "You're here," he whispered, though no one spoke back. The words were for him as much as for the unseen companion. The wind stirred, brushing his face, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender, the reminder of all that had walked beside him. He realized then that the woman in blue, the figure who had once startled him, challenged him, guided him, was no longer necessary, not in the form he had feared or revered. Her role had always been to teach him presence, courage, and trust. Step by step, Daniel walked the familiar path, each footfall a testament to endurance, learning, and acceptance. His mind drifted to Emma, to Maya, to Claire, to the countless individuals whose lives had intersected with his own journey. He understood now that they had all been part of the same lesson. Connection matters more than perfection. Presence outweighs control. Daniel paused at the bridge where the lily had first appeared, sunlight casting patterns across the planks. He kneeled, touching the cold wood, and allowed himself to remember without pain. He spoke her name softly, letting it echo in the crisp air. Emma. Every memory, every ache, every joy converged into understanding. The footsteps were no longer behind him. They had merged with his own. A faint smile touched his lips. He realized that the guidance, the protection, the silent companionship, he carried it now within himself. The fear that had once been inseparable from these walks was gone, replaced by quiet assurance. He could help, heal, walk alongside others. He was ready. As dusk approached, the shadows deepened. He continued walking, boots steady, the horizon stretching ahead. Each breath was measured, deliberate, full of life, of hope, of understanding. The road wasn't empty. It was alive with the lessons of the past, the presence of the unseen, the possibilities of tomorrow. He thought of Maya, who had seen him surrounded by light. He thought of the child he had saved on the highway. He thought of the veterans, widows, and strangers whose paths had crossed his own. Every step mattered. Every act of presence mattered. Every footfall echoed beyond him. Daniel reached the top of a small incline, pausing one last time. He closed his eyes. The wind brushed against his face. The snow, melting at the edges of the road, reflected the fading light. He inhaled deeply, filling himself with the quiet knowledge of survival, courage, and love carried forward. He opened his eyes. The horizon was clear. The city lights of Scranton twinkled in the distance. The road stretched on, inviting him, promising more to come. Daniel smiled, lifted his chin, and began walking again. He was no longer alone. He never had been. Daniel knelt at Emma's grave, the cool earth beneath his hands and the faint scent of spring flowers mixing with the crisp morning air. He held a folded letter in his hands, careful not to smudge the ink, every word a bridge between past grief and present clarity. The cemetery was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant birdsong, carrying a serenity he hadn't felt in years. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered softly. "I hope you can see this." He opened the letter, reading aloud, though no one was there to listen. Each line, each memory, was both an offering and a release. He told her about his journey, every step from despair to hope, every act of courage and compassion, every moment of fear confronted and walked through. He wrote about the woman in blue, the medallion, the footprints that once haunted him and now guided him inward. Tears blurred his vision, but they were different this time. Not for loss, but for the power of survival, of connection and of redemption. He had carried the lessons of life forward, and he knew Emma's presence had never truly left him. She lived in his actions, in the people he helped, in the choices he made each day. As he folded the letter, he felt a gentle breeze brush his cheek. It carried no sound, yet it felt alive, like a quiet whisper of encouragement. Daniel stood slowly, placing the letter atop the grave with care. He stepped back, inhaled deeply, and looked out across the cemetery. Each grave held a story, and he understood now that life was about walking beside others in their shadows, offering presence when words fell short. Daniel returned to Scranton, each step along the familiar streets grounding him. He stopped at the community park, watching a group of children play, laughter ringing through the air. A woman nearby called out, smiling at a friend. A veteran walked past, nodding in recognition. Each face, each interaction, reminded him of the journey that had brought him here, the transformation from haunted by loss to guided by purpose. He thought of Maya, Claire, Father McCleary, Marisol, and every soul who had intersected with his path. They had all contributed to his growth, just as he had walked beside them in their moments of need. Daniel realized that life's miracles were not always dramatic. Sometimes they were small, quiet, and cumulative. Each step of kindness, courage, and compassion was a miracle, not just for others, but for oneself. Standing on the hill overlooking the city, Daniel felt the final presence of the woman in blue, not beside him but within him. He understood that he carried the essence of guidance, faith, and courage in his own footsteps now. The road ahead was still long, unpredictable, and at times lonely, but he was equipped with what he needed: strength, compassion, and the knowledge that he could walk alongside others without fear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over Scranton, Daniel looked directly ahead. He took a deep breath and smiled. "If this story moved you," he said aloud, voice steady, "subscribe to our channel to walk with us through more journeys like mine. There are lessons and miracles in every step." He turned toward a nearby bench where a small sign suggested another story, a new experience waiting to be discovered. Click on the video now appearing on your screen to continue exploring stories of hope, healing, and courage, he added softly. Daniel began walking again, steady, measured, confident. He was no longer haunted by loss. He was no longer chasing footsteps in the dark. He had become the guidance, the witness, the presence for others. And in that realization, he found peace. Each step forward was deliberate. Each breath was full. Each heartbeat was a reminder. The miracle was not just beside him. It was him. It always had been. The city lights twinkled ahead. The road stretched endlessly, and Daniel moved forward, carrying the past with grace, embracing the present with courage, and stepping into the future with hope.